אני רוצה להזמין את דוקטור יאיר פורת, לנהל את הסשן הראשון.
אז אני מתכבד לפתוח את המושב הראשון של הכנס. אני חושב שהחוזקה של ישראל בתחום הביוטכנולוגיה ובפרמנטציה בפרט הוא בעצם שילוב מאוד מיוחד בין אקדמיה חזקה ומחקר בסיסי שנמצא ברמה הגבוהה ביותר בעולם לבין יזמים ואנשים של מחקר ופיתוח בתעשייה שביודעים בצורה ישראלית בטווח קצר עם הרבה חוצפה ויוזמה מהירה להפוך מחקר בסיסי למוצר תעשייתי עם כל הבעיות שאנחנו מתמודדים איתם, פעילות, חיי מדף, עמידה ברגולציה וכו'. כששוחחתי עם האנשים שאמורים לתת את ההרצאות בכנס הזה, ראיתי בעצם ממש את השילוב הזה. אנחנו נתחיל במארק וורנר שמגיע מהחזית של מערכות פרמנטציה תעשייתיות וגדולות בעולם, דרך פרופסור אסף אהרוני שבעצם יראה לנו דוגמאות למעבר ממחקר בסיסי לתעשייה, ונסיים עם סיוון פרל שבעצם הנושא שלה יהיה מחקר מאוד בסיסי על חברות של מיקרואורגניזמים. So I wanted to introduce Mark Wörner, co-founder and CEO at Liberation Labs.
Great, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to speak today. Was able to do this last year and found it to be a very good forum. Would like to talk today about biomanufacturing and why, I and the company I've built believes it's important to build what we need in the way of fermentation. So, brief background, Liberation Labs, we're working on building a global network of fit-for-purpose precision fermentation facilities, specifically focused on the processes and the organisms being developed today by many of you in the room here. I'm going to dig into, kind of what's the landscape today, where are we at, how did we get here, and what is the path forward we see to bringing on the capacity that's much needed. So I'll step back and start with where are we today. So if you're in industrial biotechnology and you're looking to commercialize a novel process or organism, you're generally using facilities that are 40 to 50 years old. They were built for pharmaceuticals, chemicals, or biofuels. Most importantly, not generally for what you're trying to make today. The fermentation can often be closer to what you need than the downstream. Very often the downstream is not what's needed and needs to be replaced completely. And even the fermentation, since much of it was built for pharmaceuticals, is smaller than you would build for the economics for industrial biotechnology. So all of this comes down to the fact, two things. First, less than 10% of what is out there today is fit for what we're trying to make today. And it really comes down to an economic question. It can make the products, but it's not making them at the price point that's needed. And a lot of the premise we have in Liberation Labs is without a purpose-built capacity solution, the industry will stall. We need to start getting the price points of these products much closer to the competitive range. So let's do a little deeper dive into where we're at today. When I say the average facility is 40 to 50 years old, this chart shows the 20 largest CMOs that are typically used in industrial biotechnology today. On the left side, you'll see what we developed as a food readiness ranking. And I talk mainly about food today. This certainly applies to materials and other novel biotech products. What's their readiness to make them today? And you'll see that the vast majority fall in the 50, 60% range or less, which usually means the fermentation can generally run the processes, but very often they have no downstream, or if they do, it's not exactly fit for purpose. And the other thing is to look at the bottom, to look at the age. These were the years the facilities were built. You can see a big lineup in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. The real wave of large-scale industrial biotechnology really started in the 50s to 70s, predominantly in Europe for things like antibiotics. So many of the facilities we're using today are in Europe, and they're antibiotics or former antibiotics facilities built in the 1960s, 1970s. In retrofitting these, as I said, we're relying on 50-year-old facilities. So you're looking at an investment decision to put tens of millions of dollars or more of a downstream into a facility that's got fermenters that were built 50, 60 years ago. And this is the route we've been doing as an industry for probably 20 years now, and it just hasn't brought us to the economics we need. So let's talk about what is it that I believe the industry needs. First and foremost, we need purpose-built for today's processes. The most common example I can give is methanol-fed pichia. It's one of the more common organisms used in food proteins. None of the facilities we're using were built to run that type of process. The older facilities really struggle to run methanol, and only a small portion of the fermenters can often do it. And because of that, the CMO network has pushed the industry to get away from methanol-fed pichia because it doesn't fit their 50-year-old infrastructure. The question we should be asking is pichia, as an example, there's certainly others, E. coli and many more, is it the right platform to be using, and how do we build the platform that gives us the best economics? Second thing is location. When you get to large-scale fermentation, sugar, electric power, and labor are about 75% of the manufacturing costs. So where you put these facilities is very important. You need all three of those components to be economically priced. So because of this, we've chosen to put our first facility in the U.S. We're looking at other geographies, Middle East and Australia, and some additional ones that we believe have a lot of the mix of capital availability, sugar, labor, power to give us those economics. They also need to be able to build these facilities to serve multiple companies, more of the model of what you see in the pharmaceutical industry. You really there have developers of technology and manufacturers. You don't have a lot of entities that are doing both of those. Flexibility, agility, the viable system economics, complete solution all on one site. This is something that I think is often kind of overlooked is most of the older CMO network now can't go from sugar to end product on one site. Very few of them have things like spray drying. If they do, it may only be for 10 or 20% of their facility. This is how companies are doing their initial proof of concept, but it's not how you would manufacture these products or cost and quality long term. So there needs to be facilities built the way you would build them to make these products, from fermentation all the way to end product on the same site. All of this is then going to roll into a lower environmental footprint. You'll often, hear a lot of people, want to retrofit these older facilities, and I wish we could do it economically, but the real economic push comes in. You may save on capital, but the additional labor, the additional power, the additional sugar you get that you're going to need to run your process make them not as economical as building a fit-for-purpose solution. So I want to talk about, we've talked about kind of the landscape, what's out there today. Let's talk about, if I'm saying this is such a great need, why haven't we built it? So it's kind of this quandary of what it takes to build a purpose-built facility. It's something we at Liberation Labs are going through right now. This is an outline of really from development through execution and startup of a new facility, what's involved. In my consulting practice before founding Liberation Labs, I worked for over a dozen companies looking to build their own capacity, and most of them would really only take their project development to about feasibility level, what we call FEL2. And that was for cost and other reasons. It's very expensive to do the entire development phase. And once they got there, they'd look to get things like government funding or different loans or things, and they didn't have a state of development of the project to get those. And part of it was because what those mechanisms want is a binding offtake contract from a reputable company, a CPG, a leading startup that has an offtake. Generally, those offtake contracts are only about 12 to 18 months out. That's generally the window. When I was consulting and helping companies find these CMOs, I would advise, that's the window you need to really lock up capacity. So what this brings us is this kind of mismatch where the development that companies were doing to try and seek financing versus when they could get things like binding offtakes just didn't match up. And there have been many, many companies over at least the last 10 years I've seen sit in this limbo. Now, what we've chosen to do as Liberation Labs is we've got an investor group that's letting us work through this. We're basically coming to the right side of this this bubble now. We've done our FEL3, our detailed design we're in the middle of. We've ordered all our long lead equipment for our first facility, and we're beginning construction actually next week on our first facility in the US. Certainly, the approach we're taking is not the only approach. So I don't mean to infer we're moving forward with speed. We would love to see others in the space because we have a significant gap in capacity that we're not the only ones that can fulfill. So to kind of summarize all this, the points I've been making so far, I think the world of the network out there today of these older CMO sites, they've done amazing things with 40, 50, 60-year-old facilities, but close enough isn't good enough. The economics just are not the same as a purpose-built facility, and that's what the industry needs. We need, everyone in the industry likes to use the hardware software example. We're using modern software on a 10-year-old computer, and we can do everything we want to that 10-year-old computer. At some point, you need to get a new computer, and that's what we need in the way of biomanufacturing infrastructure. My belief is manufacturing cost needs to be the primary driver. I don't see a lack of companies' abilities to make these great novel products we all believe are going to change the world and bring things very significantly needed in sustainability and health and other things. Cost is the major obstacle at this point. Financing needs to match the state of development. You heard me discuss the approach we've taken with our investor group to work through that kind of mismatch. There are certainly other ways that it can be done, but what I like to say is you have to acknowledge that up front. You can't, I hope I don't continue to see companies do early stage development and sit there for years trying to justify building a project when the mismatch just won't get them there. Part of this is, don't make perfect the enemy of the good. If you can't get the bank or governmental financing, you have to acknowledge up front that it can be a long shot at times and figure out another way to work through. And this is something I've seen having been in the startup industry for over 10 years now. Time is money, meaning I see companies want to continue to sit in this development stage for a very long time. You burn capital, you continue, the cost of overhead is a real cost. Building, I often hear people talk about how expensive these facilities are to build, yet I'll see companies sit in limbo for 4 or 5 years and burn in overhead half the cost of a new facility. These all need to be taken into account to really get the impetus to move us forward. And that's probably the biggest thing I want to wrap up with today is just to continue to push, as I've done through different publications, that this is a critical need. The industry is going to stall if we don't bring more fit for purpose capacity online. And I see a lot of discussion of the need, but I would like to see more tangible action beyond just what we're doing to bring that capacity to bear. So with that, would open up to any questions if I have any time left. And appreciate the opportunity today.
So I will ask one question. You're talking about long-term processes of planning. What is your opinion about the current slowdown in world economy? How does it affect these long-term processes?
You know, we haven't seen it as much. I mean, you're still seeing, you can see it by the funding levels going in the front end. There's still, been billions of dollars going into the organism development companies and things. I do think there has been a pullback. You've seen it in valuations of companies. You've seen it in other things, but there is such a gap in capacity need. I don't see it impacting the need in the near term. Frankly, I don't think we as an industry can build fast enough for the next 5 or 10 years to fill the gap. So I myself don't see it as a major obstacle. Obviously, fundraising has been a little more difficult for all of us, but there's still ample money out there for the right ventures.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. אני אעבור לעברית.
Thank you.